All right, back for week 9. This week, Stempel focuses on the later part of Rodgers and Hammerstein's collaboration, Lerner and Lowe and Harnick and Bach, and the shift to performance style that was created and started by Oklahoma with Rodgers and Hammerstein, but continued on. And Jones was talking much more about the social implications that came out during this time and how they affected the shows. Comparatively, how I've been not liking Jones as much as Stempel, this week I definitely preferred the reading by Jones. I thought it was really interesting that he was creating the juxtaposition between musical theater like really growing and finding their own and trying to like further themselves as a legitimate art style, whereas at the same time the American at least middle class was very, very stagnant. They were what was the word? They were being very complacent, wanting to fit into the status quo. You know, suburbia was becoming a thing and being built. Came out of the financial success that we found after World War II. But socially, we were in upheaval. There was so much fear around the Cold War, about the fear of spies and communism. And you had a whole generation just not going out into the theater and really trying to fit into the status quo and not make waves and not being noticed. But out of that, the fact that modern technology led to fewer people going to the theater because you could watch it at home, it led to some really great things. So, for example, my family, I'm one of 4 kids, and while my parents were able to get season tickets to Dallas Summer Musicals when I was growing up, we only had available to us what came on tour, whereas we could not afford operas or to go to New York or other places that had a much wider selection of professional theater. But because Masterpiece Theater, which came out of, I would imagine came out of many of the programs that were happening during the 40s and 50s, we were able to see things like Madame Butterfly, which I never would have been able to experience without it. So there were a lot of good things in that. Americans who may not be able to get to theaters and see the arts in person were still able to participate in them and experience it, even though it did lead to fewer people liking it. Sondheim talking about how, yeah, we don't have people in the theater because they didn't grow up going to the theater, and if you're being introduced to it as a grown adult after rock and roll and all, you probably won't like it. I also found it interesting that the association between the Kennedys and Camelot was just a side note that Jackie O said after Kennedy's death, just saying like he really liked the music from it and we would listen to it, and then all of a sudden the Kennedys and the Camelot, you know, that America became Camelot during their time in the White House. I found that interesting. That was where it started, because that is not a connection I would have made otherwise. And Jones also really highlights the point that there was a lot of, like, we had this complacency in suburbia, but we also had a lot of juvenile delinquents, a lot of people who didn't fit or were lost about where they should be or where they fell into it. And there were quite a few shows, West Side Story being one, that called out the discrepancies of the time, that called out the racism of the time and the bigotry. And I really wonder if we're able to see that now and compare the history with the shows and see that it was really very accurate and timely commentary. And I wonder how many people at that time were completely unaware. And if it was because they were overwhelmed by the situation or because they just didn't recognize it in how their day-to-day interactions contributed to the social problems and the social injustices of the time. It was also interesting when you go to Stempel that he not only talked about, like, yes, there for a while, Oklahoma's being copied. Rodgers and Hammerstein, definitely, that was their template. They found it, they worked, they were just trying to perfect that template. But we start getting into Pygmalion being turned into My Fair Lady, which was done by Harnick and Bach, and Rogers and Hammerstein said it's impossible, it can't be done. And it was because it couldn't be done in the format that they found success in. You had to change the format and see if it worked. And it did, because we still see My Fair Lady. We still work with it, and there's still performances of it. I also, I made comments about Brigadoon and Camelot, but I think I want to leave this on the idea that because of the changes from the source material for Fiddler on the Roof to the final, that we see Tevye from being a man destroyed by not being able to step out of his tradition, to end Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye grows and still holds importance in that tradition, but also the love for his children was more important. And I think that that was so apropos for the time, and the idea that there was so much change and fear, and that the everyday people were actually really adaptable, even through McCarthyism, the Cold War, and the furtherment in the stirrings of the civil rights coming out and together. That people were trying to honor tradition, but also they were changing with the times, and the idea that we need to love our children more than we hate our enemy. I think get fed into that, but overall really interesting readings this week.